Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, today is Thursday, April 30th, last day of the month. We have made it through the month of April, which I think we'd all agree wasn't the most outstanding month for any of us out there, staying at home, being quarantined, everything going on in the world out there with COVID-19, the coronavirus, all the healthcare workers out there. Shout out once again to you guys. Jumping right into that, just want to thank you once more. I know I try to bring it up at least every episode. Sometimes I forget as we get flowing. That's why I wanted to do it at the top of the show here today. Just give another shout out to everybody out there working in healthcare, doctors, nurses, anybody who's putting their lives on the line to take care of others. We really do appreciate you. I know here on the East Coast, the Northeast, in Philadelphia and New York City, we had the Blue Angels fly over to show their appreciation of everybody, again, putting their lives on the line for the rest of us out there. So we really do appreciate it. But we got a great show lined up for you today. It is episode 184 of the Baseball Podcast. Shout out to everybody who has left us a review in the past. I know I've read most of them on the show here. But once again, just wanted to reiterate, if you want to give us a 5-star rating and write a review, you'll get, your name read here on the show. Lehigh Alum 11, Pitt number 1, Bridge Lind and Athletic SEC. Those are the user IDs that have left reviews on Apple Podcasts so far. So if you're listening to this and want to hear your name being called, write us a review. I'll read it on the show and we'll get you guys some airtime out there. But we got a great show lined up for you today. Let's jump right into it with our first segment, coronavirus update. And it's really not an update as much as an affirmation of what I've been talking to you guys about in the past, because based on 3 people who are close to the talks going on between Major League Baseball, the United States, the MLBPA, they came out and they are cautiously optimistic. Now, they didn't put their name to the report, obviously, because they're not allowed to talk about it yet. So, quote-unquote, sources close to the situation are cautiously optimistic that games will be starting in late June and no later than July 2nd. Now, if you guys have been listening to the show since I was brought on as the host here, you know that I've targeted July 4th since all of this has come out as kind of the date to get America back, USA's birthday, America's birthday. I think it's a perfect opportunity to try to get sports back into the world, back into the economy, bring some hope back to the American people that things can and will, eventually get back to normal. Even if you're not a baseball fan, just a fan of sports and a fan of normalcy, even at this point. So, just running through a couple additional bullet points of what the sources are talking about. The plan is for Major League Baseball to return. Like I said, start at the end of June, no later than July 2nd. They're hopeful that they will get in at least 100 games. This would make it 3 to 4 months, July, August, September, October, I believe the 4-month plan, and then to play the playoffs in November in warmer climate areas. But one bullet point that did come out that I was very much surprised with was they're hopeful that eventually throughout this summer and the end of summer, potentially into the fall, that major league teams could use their home ballparks. So We talked about the plan of Arizona, Florida, and Texas on one of the most recent podcasts, and that is still the target to start to bring everybody back. They can't kind of disperse throughout America. State by state, they're starting to reopen their economies, and slowly but surely, that's where they're hoping by the end of summer and into the fall, they'll be able to get back into each person's home ballpark. Now, even if they do start in Arizona, Florida, and Texas, like we said before, 10 teams in each division for 3 divisions, this will still be the case moving forward. Even if they do return to their home ballparks, it's basically going to be on geography. There's no longer going to be interleague play. The Phillies aren't going to play the AL West or the AL Central or who was ever on the docket for the schedule this year. They're strictly going to stay within their division to limit travel as much as possible. Now, in the East, you're still going to have teams like the Miami Marlins, and the New York Yankees, New York Mets. So teams will still have to fly from New York to Florida. But again, that is kind of down the road. And even, as I'm staring here, turning into month number 5, month 8, 9, and 10. So, 90 days away. That's where they're optimistic that this could ultimately happen. So another key to this plan that is going over a little bit better with ball players out there and the Players Association as a whole is that this one does not include isolation or quarantine from their families. People have come out, Clayton Kershaw, Zach Wheeler, Mike Trout, just to name a couple of superstars, not just your average Joe, but superstars, basically saying, if you guys want me to go to Arizona and quarantine for 90 days, 120 days, it's not going to happen because, one, we're expecting our first child, in Mike Trout's case, or, children for whoever it is, and as well as just being away from your family for that long, whether it's your wife or your girlfriend or whoever you enjoy spending your time with. A lot of the players voice their concern about this obstacle and how they don't believe this would ever take place. People aren't going to leave their families for 120 days just to go make, $1 million to $2 million bucks. The top end guys would be a little bit, more obligated to do it. Your Garrett Coles, who are getting $35-40 million a year, would probably be a little bit more interested in a quarantine option. But, those players who are in the first few years of their career where they're still making minimum or pre-arbitration or arbitration eligible, they're not going to be away from their families, their children for 120 days and making $600,000, before taxes. It's just not going to be worth it at that time. So, another question that is being answered here is, hey, what's the ramp-up time that's going to be needed when it comes to diving into a plan such as this? And again, these sources who spoke, they talked about 2 to 3 weeks for these guys to prepare. Now, if you're asking me directly, I think it's more on that 2-week time frame and almost as minimal as 10 days. If you get to 2 weeks, that gives each starting pitcher 2 starts to kind of ramp things up. And I think that'll be enough time to, get to where we need to be, especially with the expanded roster that has been reported. Add an additional pitcher if you have to. Make it 30. Make it 31 guys. Pay them big league minimum because, again, the minor leagues most likely aren't going to be happening this year. We've seen mixed reports come out about whether or not they're even going to be playing a minor league, year. So if you have AAA guys, call them up, let them sit there, pay them minimum, pay them their minor league salary. I don't know, give them $100,000 because nobody's coming to these games, so you're not going to have the revenue to pay them. So that's where I think 10 days, 14 days, 2 weeks at most is going to be what is needed. And again, that's, May 1st. If they're looking to start by July 2nd, you got 6 more weeks until these guys would have to report. And now I'm not trying to get ahead of myself here, but looking at where we are at the end of April now, we're at kind of that 6-week mark to when quarantine started. And if you look at the charts, depending on which one you're looking at, who you are, you probably have mixed reviews, but it seems to be improving and it seems to be getting better as a whole. Hopefully, as a country, we're on that downturn of the bell curve. Locally here in Pennsylvania, we seem to be on the downturn. I know New York City has kind of stabilized. California out west, there's mixed reviews. It's still up and down a little bit, but it seems to be we're getting over that hump here. And if you give it an additional 6 weeks, hopefully that's when we'll get back to almost like it was before we started. So, one question that still is being asked, and again, they're not getting into a ton of detail because nothing is set, nothing is confirmed, but it's a conversation that I brought up to you guys in the past episode. But what are you going to do with the playoffs? If you have 3 divisions, at a minimum, you're going to have 4 teams like they have in the past. So I guess you have your 3 division winners and a 4th wild card. Truly, I bet you just in the nature of consistency, they probably have the 3 division winners and the 2 wild cards playing a wild card play-in. But if it's only 100 games, I mean, you could have yourself some fun. Maybe get 8 teams in, 16 teams, play a little bit more of a March Madness style of bracket, best of 3s instead of best of 1s in the month of November. There's a multitude of ways they could go about doing this to bring excitement, as well as if we're not having NCAA football in the fall and the only thing we're having is NFL, less competition on the weekends, only 1 day a week, truly. So I think there could be money to be had there when it comes to television rights and, putting playoff baseball on the map and regaining some of those fans who may have left over the course of, this game takes too long. It's home run or strikeout, feast or famine. And, I miss the hit and run style of baseball. And I myself, I'm a little bit in that category. I'm not going to lie to you. I miss the hit and run, the bunt for singles, things like that. So, cautiously optimistic. People close to baseball believe that they could start in late June, no later than July 2nd. Again, 2 to 3 weeks before that, spring training. So reporting early in June is where we're keeping an eye on. So almost 5 weeks away from a potential report date. So stay home, stay safe, continue to flatten that curve so ultimately we can have baseball sooner than later. But that'll wrap up the first segment here. What we'll do in the next segment is I'm going to break down the divisions that they're talking about, the East, Central, and West, and then I'm going to re-predict those divisions, 1 through 10, ultimately where I think everybody would fall. So we're going to pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows here within the GSMC Podcast Network. Hang around, guys. We'll be right back.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, we got a great episode lined up for you here today, episode number 184 of the Baseball Podcast. Today is Thursday, April 30th. If you're listening to this, if you're listening to this here in the month of May, that's fine. That's not a problem. That's the beauty of the podcast. You can listen to them at your leisure at any time. I know I myself am a little behind on listening to the podcast here within the network, as well as other ones that I enjoy listening to, because I don't have my morning commute. I don't have my afternoon commute. So I was trying to catch up here. I can understand that, you're a few days back. But really, we got a good show lined up for you. What we're going to do here in the second segment, after we discuss the coronavirus, the latest update in the guarded optimism that is coming out of Major League Baseball with their vision of playing at the end of June and into the month of July, they're going to break it down into three divisions. We're going to have the East Division, the Central Division, and then the West Division. And I figured I would break down which teams in each division and then re-rank them 1 through 10. I know I predicted normalcy in the normal divisions of the AL and NL. Well, throw all that out the window. It's just three divisions, no conferences, no split playoffs, no conference championships, NLCS, ALCS. That playoffs is going to be wild to discuss here. So let's talk about the team list and ultimately the travel that will be happening within the divisions, because there will not be, people in the East playing the Central. It's going to be playing the 9 other teams in your division, and with the goal of upwards of 100 games. It's going to be 10, 11, 12 games against each of these rivals or teams. Honestly, I think it's going to be 12. I think the goal would be to play 4 3-game series against each one of these teams. 12 times 9, carry the 2, 90, 108 would be the goal for the amount of games being played moving forward. But let's jump into the teams. Starting in the East, we're looking at the New York Yankees, the New York Mets, the Boston Red Sox, the Washington Nationals, Baltimore Orioles, Philadelphia Phillies, Pittsburgh Pirates, Toronto Blue Jays make the list there as they're in Eastern Canada, the Tampa Bay Rays, and the Miami Marlins rounding out the top 10. So what I'm going to do now is rank these guys kind of 1 through 10, ultimately where I would see them finishing. We'll go 10 to 1, and then we'll kind of talk about the playoffs and what ultimately could take place down the road. Again, since there are no 2 separate conferences where 5 teams each make it, that would be a total of 10 playoff teams. We could be looking at 12 or 8 or 16 out of the 3 divisions making it, and everybody kind of going back to college, back to AAU baseball, going big time tournament, double elimination, best of 3, whatever it may be. So in oh my God, I almost said the AL East or NL East. It's just the East. Again, it's one of those things. It's going to be crazy. Whatever happens, 2020 is going to be wild, and we might as well enjoy it. There's no sense in getting upset or this isn't regular baseball or normal baseball, even if they're playing 7 innings instead of 9. Everybody knows that 2020 is going to be different and come, with an asterisk, but there's still going to be a World Series champion. At least I hope there will be, and they will still be recognized as this year's World Series champion. Again, 2017-18, Houston won the World Series. So, well, the next sentence is, yeah, but, blah, 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 blah. But hey, they won. It is what it is. That's going to be the point here in 2020 as well. So, in the East Division, let's see, at the top, let's go bottom to top. So, number 10, I have the Baltimore Orioles. I don't think they're going to be very good. I don't think I'm going out on a limb there with that one for anybody listening. Sorry to you Orioles fans, and I know a few of them, and I know they're listening to the pod. It's not going to be a fun summer for you regardless of what happens. And, brief point here, Trey Mancini diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. Shout out to Trey Mancini. Hopefully you get back as soon as possible and, everything goes well with your chemotherapy and whatnot. So, wanted to get that in here at some point today. Didn't know exactly where it was going to happen, but if you guys did not see that, he wrote an article for the Players Tribune. That's a very good article. You should definitely read it. And, it's basically about how he's thankful that they found this cancer hopefully early enough to save his life, because without baseball, without the physicals, he doesn't think he would have been here, much longer. So, number 9, Pittsburgh Pirates. Not good as well. And, like I said, I got a Yinzer listening. They wrote a review on the podcast. So, I apologize to Pitt fan number 1 who left the review, but your Pirates, not going to be the best ball club this year. Number 8, the Miami Marlins, clearly in a rebuild, continued rebuild. Yes, they have talent up and coming, but it's not going to be here in 2020. No surprise there. Number 7 is actually the Toronto Blue Jays. I like their young core talent. I don't think it's going to show up in time for this summer for them to make a playoff run. Number 6 is the New York Mets. I would have had them higher if not for the Noah Syndergaard injury that's recently happened. That's been tough for them. Number 5, I have the Boston Red Sox. I think they're just outside the playoff picture looking in here. Number 4, the Philadelphia Phillies. Number 3, the Washington Nationals, the NL East representing there in 4th and 3rd. Second place, the Tampa Bay Rays. And then in first, the New York Yankees. Obviously the AL East is superior to the NL East. That's why I went Yankees, Rays, and then Nationals, Phillies, with those top 4 potentially being playoff teams if we do go 12 deep. So in that case, Yankees, Rays, Nationals, Phillies fighting for playoff spots. Transitioning over to the Central, we'll just go 10-1 instead of reading the teams and then ranking them in the art of time here. Number 10, Detroit Tigers, not very good. Lost 100-plus games, most likely to lose 100-plus games once again this summer, so no surprise there at the bottom. The Kansas City Royals, they were voted as well, kind of the bottom of the AL Central, so I think they'll continue to be in the basement, but then it gets interesting. This is a tough division to pin down where ultimately I think these teams, because a lot of them are clumped together. The top end of this division, 1-2, I think is ahead of 3 through 8. And I think 3 through 8 could really finish in any form of, the standings there. But just in my predictions here, number 8, I got the Milwaukee Brewers. Number 7, the Chicago Cubs. Number 6, the Cincinnati Reds. Once again, my surprise for the NL. Number 5, the Cleveland Indians. The supercomputers have them a little bit higher than I do, so I'm, kind of leaning there towards the AI and what's going on. And Terry Francona, just, the manager overall, I think he makes a difference. Number 4, the Chicago White Sox. I like the White Sox. I think they put it together. I think they make a run. The shorter the season, the better the opportunity for them, I think, to establish themselves over 162. They could kind of fall back down to everybody else, but I think in a little bit more of a sprint, they'll find themselves being successful. And number 3, the St. Louis Cardinals. So really putting those teams kind of in any order, I think battling each other based on injury, what happens, health, starting pitching. They could finish anywhere. And then 1-2, I have the Twins, number 2, and then the Braves, number 1. I think those two teams are clearly 1-2 in this division. And then 3-4, Cardinals, White Sox end up in playoff position here in the Central. And then lastly, the Western Division. The top 2 really ahead of everybody else here, going from bottom to top. Seattle Mariners, they're in a rebuild. They're at number 10 down the bottom. And then it becomes the Texas Rangers. Their starting pitching could put it together. They could make a bit of a run, a new ballpark, but they're not going to be in that new ballpark, but they could be in that new ballpark if, depending on what's going on. That field's being talked about, the ones where they could use at number 9. San Diego Padres, if they put it together. Manny Machado out there. I have them actually 8th. I don't think they have as strong a summer as a lot of people are predicting. At 7, San Francisco Giants. You know what? Flip the Padres and the Giants. Put Giants 8, Padres 7. Either way, they're not making the playoffs. At 6, the Colorado Rockies. And then, let's see, number 5, the LA Angels. I think the Angels are going to be better than people anticipate this year. Mike Trout in his prime, he's fantastic. I think he carries them, once again in a bit of a more of a sprint. I think you're going to see Mike Trout come out, like a bull with with his hair on fire and lighten things up. Number 4, the Oakland Athletics. Number 3, the Arizona Diamondbacks. And then 1-2, your Houston Astros and your LA Dodgers in whatever order you want there. But once again, 1-2, Houston and the Astros. I think they're no doubters when it comes to the playoffs. Then you get into the Diamondbacks with Bumgarner, who, again, the supercomputers think he's going to have another excellent year. And the Oakland Athletics, 1-4. But interesting again, East, Central, West, teams like the Dodgers and Astros who wouldn't meet until the World Series could be playing 12 times against each other in the regular season. So it's going to be very entertaining, such as the Phillies and Yankees. It's going to be rivalries renewed in battles you typically don't see on a yearly basis that could be entertaining. But that wraps up the second segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am Kevin Mahalik once again. We're going to pause for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows here within the network. Hang around for just a second. We'll be right back.
I want to talk to you guys about this amazing product I've been using lately called Hydrant. If you're like me and you want to kick the coffee habit, but you're worried about your energy levels depleting, to avoid the morning sluggishness and that midday slump, you need to make sure you're hydrated. It's super important. And that's where I've been using Hydrant. And for 25% off your first order, you can go to drinkhydrant.com and enter promo code GSMC at checkout. Hydrant is basically flavored electrolyte packets you mix directly into your water to make hydrating your body easy and delicious. And what I love about Hydrant, it's backed by research. The formula was developed by Oxford scientists to provide perfectly balanced, efficient hydration. Again, that's drinkhydrant.com and enter promo code GSMC for 25% off your first order. Another really cool thing about Hydrant, there's no synthetic colors or artificial sweeteners. The formula is vegan and you can choose between 3 different flavors or a variety pack. So for all my vegan friendly fellows out there, this one's for you. Again, this is drinkhydrant.com and enter promo code GSMC.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. I appreciate everybody tuning in here to episode number 184 of the Baseball Podcast. Those first couple of segments, they were fun. It's going to be a lot of change for 2020 in the baseball season here. So all you traditionalists out there who don't want to see change in the game of baseball, you may want to close your eyes for the next 6 months here, because no matter what happens, it's going to be different than your standard game that you love out there. Whether it's divisions, travel, teams, it's going to be a wild summer. So, just enjoy it. That's all I can say. Have some fun. 7 innings, 9 innings, Yankees, Phillies, not interleague play. It's going to be a joy. Is there a DH? Is there not? Oh, well, they're at their home stadium. Well, we're all at neutral stadium. So what are we doing here? A lot to be answered. But again, cautiously optimistic at the end of June and into early July, we're going to have baseball. But getting into the third segment here, One of the most fun segments that we've been doing over the course of the past couple of weeks. I know you listeners, I've gotten some feedback. We got a review on Apple Podcasts saying they can't wait to hear the best of all time. Well, in segment number 3, we run through each team, their top 3 teams of all time. Today, we're transitioning over to the National League, starting once again in the East, going east to west like we did with the American League. Let's jump right into it. In the Atlanta Braves, we'll start out right with them. It's funny because Atlanta made that crazy run in the 90s and only won one World Series championship, but it probably wasn't even the best team that they had. And that's going to be a common theme throughout this division at least one more time, because the third best team that I have is the 1998 team. 106 wins. That's the most wins out of any of those teams in the late 90s, and that team lost in the NLCS. They didn't even make the World Series, so that's why I have them third on the list. You then follow that up with 1999. They had 103 wins, where they lost the World Series. So 209 wins in 2 years, and no World Series championship to show for it. Just has to be frustrating as a Braves fan out there. And I know a couple of Braves fans. They're listeners of the show, so they're going to be upset that I'm going, hey, you won 209, but you didn't win anything. So there you are, number 2, number 3. And that leaves 1995. Only 90 wins in the regular season, so in the teens less than those previous teams, but World Series champions. And you've been listening to the show, so you know World Series champ puts you at the top. If you didn't win the World Series, even if you won 150 games, you wouldn't be the best team of all time for that franchise. So the 1995 Braves take the crown for the best Braves team of all time. Next up, we got the Miami Marlins. Let's see. 2009 is their third best team. And Miami, don't let Miami make the playoffs, okay? Or the Florida Marlins, whichever one you want to go with. I guess these teams would technically be the Florida Marlins, this version of the teams. But the Marlins have made the playoffs twice and won the World Series twice, okay? It's a wild thing. They've never made it and lost in the postseason. So when I'm looking at the third ranked team, I'm going, what do I do here? I took the team with the most wins in the regular season, and that was the 2009 ball club. They won 87 games and didn't make the playoffs. So that's the third best team. Right up then, you got the top 2. It's 97 or 2003. I went back and forth. I did some research, and ultimately I ended up choosing 2003 as the top ball club. So that makes number 2, 1997. They had 92 wins, won the World Series. The 2003 team only had 91 wins, so one less win, but ultimately that's one game. I mean, that's a blown save or a home run in extras. I didn't see a big difference there in ranking them. But 2 World Series championships for the Marlins. Just fascinating when you look at it. And then you look at the Braves, again, in the modern era, post 1970, I think, as far as we've gone back, only having one championship. And then this next team only having one championship. So kudos to the Marlins. If they get in, they're winning the dang thing. So don't let them to the dance, because they're going to go home with the prettiest girl. That's what we found out from the Miami Marlins. Next up, the New York Mets. They have their third best team is the 2006 team. They had 97 wins, but lost the NLCS. I remember the NLCS against the Cardinals that year, I believe it was. I was on an official recruiting visit to a college out in western Pennsylvania. We were watching that game, and who was it? Was it Endy Chavez? You guys will have to correct me out there if I'm wrong, but robbed a home run out in left field. The Mets guy did. The Mets ended up winning that game. That's my big memory from the series, being on a recruiting visit, watching that, going, oh my God, what a catch in the playoffs. That's crazy. So that's their third best team of all time back in 2006. Then you have the most recent squad, 2015. They had 90 wins in the regular season, ended up making it to the World Series before they lost to the Kansas City Royals, who we talked about in a few episodes ago. That's the second best squad for the Mets in the modern era. And then their best team, the 1986 team, 108 wins, World Series champs. It's just 108 wins. Very impressive. I don't remember that from the 86 Mets. Now, again, I was born in 89, so I wasn't around watching it day in and day out, but everybody knows what happened in 86. And that team having 108 wins is definitely not discussed as much as it should be when talking about the best teams of the modern era. So the 1986 Mets take home the crown of the best Mets team of all time. Next up, we got the hometown squad, my boys, the Philadelphia Fightin' Phils, the Phillies. Number 3, probably the best team in Phillies history. Again, it is the best team in Phillies history on paper during the regular season. They had 102 wins in 2011, and they also had a 10-game losing streak that summer. So think about that, 102 and 60, and they lost 10 straight at one point. If they go 5-5, we're talking 107 wins, but they lost the NLDS. Roy Halladay lost game 5, 1-0, gave up a run, I believe it was in the first inning, and then nobody else scored again. Ryan Howard tears his Achilles at the end of the series in walk-off fashion, so to adding injury to insult, just unbelievable. But the four horsemen, Oswalt, Hamels, Lee, Halladay, that team was absolutely loaded, and a dang shame that they couldn't get it done. Next up is their 2 World Series champions. And, I cheated here a little bit because locally they ran a simulation on which team would win. The 80 Phillies or the 2008 Phillies. I myself, seeing the 08 team, I should put them first, right? Being selfish. But in the simulation, the 1980 squad won that series in 6 games. So, number 2, 2008, 92 wins, World Series champions. And then the best team in Phillies history, the 1980 club. Mike Schmidt really was the difference. I mean, in the simulation, the guy hit like 400 with a couple home runs, a ton of RBIs. I know Mike. He's, one of my favorite players growing up of all time, watching highlights. The highlights you can from 1980, but it just shows how good he was as, I believe the best third baseman of all time. There are a few names you could argue in there, but you're really not going to go against Mike Schmidt and win that argument too many times, if ever. So 1980 Phillies come out as the best Phillies team of all time. Rounding out the division, we got the Washington Nationals, and I included the Montreal Expos in this one. Again, kind of 1970 on. Well, the Expos don't make the list. Okay, there are not many Expos teams that were very good. So the third ranked squad here is the 2012 Washington Nationals. I don't remember this squad very well, the year after I graduated college, but they had 98 wins before losing in the NLDS, the divisional series, which is probably why I don't really remember them losing in the first round. The second best team, once again, very, very recent, 2017, 97 wins. A great squad, but losing in the NLDS. Bryce Harper, I believe, was on both of those teams. I think he made his debut in 2012 for that squad, and then, was in his prime there, and still is in his prime, but very much hit the cover off the ball in 2017 for 97 wins before they lost the NLDS. And then the best team of all time, last year's squad, the 2019 version of the Washington Nationals, take home the crown as the best team of all time for the Nationals. 93 regular season wins, but obviously World Series champions in 7 games over the Houston Astros. So coming up here next segment, I'll rank where I think the best of the best would finish if they were all playing in the same season, number 1 through 5. We'll get into some statistics on some of those players and ultimately why I think I have them there. But the 2019 Nationals, 1980 Phillies, 86 Mets, 03 Marlins, and 95 Braves are who we're going to rank 1 through 5. So we're going to pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows. I'm going to regroup, get these guys in order here, and then come back to you guys with the standings of the ultimate best of the best in the NL East next segment. So stick around with us. I'm Kevin Mahalik. This is the GSMC Baseball Podcast. We'll be right back.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik, as always, and this is episode number 184. Hopefully you're enjoying today's episode so far as we transition into segment number 4, where we are going to rank the best of the National League East. If every team were to put the best version out on the field during the same year, how do I think they would finish after 162 games? If you're just joining us, the teams we're going to be discussing: the 80 Phillies, 03 Marlins, 95 Braves, 86 Mets, and 19 Nationals. And let's see here. Let's jump right into it, because this segment can run long, depending on some of the statistics we find and ultimately where we end up with this conversation. But thanks again for tuning in. I appreciate it. Take a second, leave us a review, leave us a 5-star rating. I'll get you guys some airtime if you write a review. I very much appreciate it. But going 5-1, I'm going 2019 Nationals at 5th in the basement. I really am. You know, they won the series in 7 games over the Astros. The first team in history in baseball, but I believe the first team in history in any sport to win games 6 and 7, both on the road, being down 3-2 after, now every road team won. That's the first time that's ever happened. It wasn't just 6 and 7. They won games 1 and 2, then lost 3, 4, and 5, and then won 6 and 7. Just fascinating. Looking back on it, how the heck does that even happen? Just a wild, wild series. But, this team, looking at it top to bottom, Yan Gomes, Matt Adams, they're okay. That's why I had them at the bottom. Brian Dozier only hit .238 last year for them. They were obviously led by Anthony Rendon, 34 homers, 126 RBIs. He hit .319 on the year. Juan Soto, only 20 years old, 34 home runs, 110 RBIs, hitting .282 on the year. Those were the two big bats offensively that carried them. But Adams and Dozier both had 20 home runs, just very, very low averages when it came down to it. Howie Kendrick played a lot for them. He hit .344, 17 homers, 62 RBIs, a professional hitter at age 35. Ryan Zimmerman, also a professional hitter. He's getting a little bit up there in age. His power has dropped down tremendously. Only hit 257, but Kurt Suzuki, also a professional hitter. They added Asdrubal Cabrera, who's a professional hitter. So Michael Taylor, not a lot of easy outs for this team, I will say, but the top end talent isn't to the level of some of these others that we're going to talk about offensively. From a rotation standpoint, Steven Strasburg, 18-6, 3.32 ERA, over 200 innings. Patrick Corbin, 14-7, over 200 innings. Max Scherzer, 172 innings. He only went 11-7. Kind of a down year for Scherzer standards, but still very, very strong in the postseason. And then the bullpen, it was their Achilles heel, but it got it done in the playoffs when they needed to, with Sean Doolittle ultimately being the closer with 29 saves, shutting the door there. It just, Fernando Rodney, Jeremy Hellickson, a good ball club. Don't get me wrong. They played great baseball from May on, top team in the league right there with Houston. But when it comes to the best of the best, they're going to be at the bottom of this division. Next up, I have the 2003 Marlins finishing 4th place. And you're probably like, really, man, that team was pretty dang good. Yeah, so are these other ones that I'm about to get to. So, Pudge Rodriguez was on that Marlins team. He hit 297 with 16 homers that year. Derek Lee at first base, 31-92. Luis Castillo, Alex Gonzalez, Mike Lowell, Juan Encarnacion, Juan Pierre, and then a young kid named Miguel Cabrera, who turned out to be pretty good with 12 home runs, 62 RBIs in 87 games for you. Mike Redmond, Brian Banks coming off the bench, a solid squad offensively, 1 through 9. And then, like I said, those bench pieces that didn't know were that good, but really, really were. Juan Pierre had 65 stolen bases and hit 305, an OBP of 361, just a menace on the base paths. Luis Castillo and Derek Lee both had 20-plus steals. Just a good overall team across the board. And then on the mound, again, kind of leaving something to be desired, but if you look at the names and you learn what they turn into, very, very good. Carl Pavano, yeah, he was 12-13, but 200 innings at the top of the rotation. Brad Penny, you guys remember that name, 14-10. Dontrell Willis, 14-6. Josh Beckett, Mark Redmond. Willis and Beckett were nasty at the top of their careers and almost unhittable, as you know, by, no hitters and perfect games. But Ugueth Urbina coming out of the bullpen, Braden Looper, Michael Tejera. It's a good club in 03. AJ Burnett was on that team only for 4 games, but he was on that squad. It's a good team that, again, I have just above the Washington Nationals, but not at that elite level that the top 3, I believe, are. And next up, again, because they weren't even the best version of the Braves, the 1995 Braves finishing in 3rd place. Javi Lopez behind the dish. He hit 315 that year for them in 100 games. Fred McGriff, first baseman. He was 31 at the time, still had 27 in 93. Let's see. Chipper Jones was a young kid at third base there, 23 years old, but he had 23 in 86. Ryan Klesko, 23 in 70. He hit 310. Marquise Grissom, let's see, 12 and 42, hitting 258. David Justice out in right field at age 29. A good, solid ball club. Out in the outfield, Dwight Smith, Mike Kelly. Oh, man, just solid. But the reason I have them above the 03 Marlins and the 19 Nationals is not the offense, although it was very good. It's the pitching staff, and it's very tough to argue with the pitching staff. Pretty much the top 3 at this point. Number 1, Greg Maddux. He went 19-2. He lost 2 games the entire year. That's amazing. He had a 1.63 ERA. People forget how good Greg Maddux was. People my age forget how good Greg Maddux was. That's the way I should put it. If you're in your 30s, go back and watch the highlights. Boy, could that man make the ball dance. Whew, God, that front hip to a lefty Coming back on the inside corner, two-seam fastball. Could watch that for hours, man. It was just insane what he could do with the ball. 1.63 ERA, 19-2. Man. Oh, Tom Glavine, not too shabby, 16-7, a 3 ERA in 198 innings. And then John Smoltz was still in the starting rotation at this time at age 28. He went 12-7 in 192 innings. So, led by Maddox, Glavine, and Smoltz, that's a tough team to beat in a series best of 7 when those guys are pitching 6 out of the 7 games. Out of the bullpen, Pedro Bourbon, Greg McMichael, a lot of options for those guys here. So the 95 Braves finishing in third, right behind, maybe a little bit of hometown heroism here, but the 1980 Phillies, I have them as runners up in the East. Bob Boone behind the dish. Pete Rose at first base at age 39, on the tail end of his career. Didn't have much power, only 1 home run, but still hit 282 with 185 hits. The hit king, still impressive, 185 at age 39. Whew, God, still getting it done. Manny Trio, Larry Boa at shortstop at age 34. Not much power from him either. Again, the power came from a guy by the name of Mike Schmidt at third base. He was the home run champion that year. 48 homers, 121 RBIs. He hit 286. Only struck out 119 times, had 89 walks. That's just the old school baseball I enjoy. Guy hits 48 dingers, only strikes out 119 times. I'd want to see the guys that hit 48 this past year and their strikeout numbers. It's a heck of a lot higher than 119. Greg Lazinski out in left field. Gary Maddox in center. Bake McBride in right. Lonnie Smith coming off the bench. Greg Gross was another guy used quite often. Lonnie Smith hit 339, a good year offensively for him. And then on the mound, Steve Carlton, 24-9. Talk about getting decisions. At age 35, throwing 304 innings. That's just insane to think about in today's game. 2.34 ERA. Bob Walk, Dick Ruthven, he was 17-10. So a solid team. Tug McGraw closing games out, 92 innings. Ron Reed. It just, honestly, Steve Carlton and Mike Schmidt being two of the best ever to do it puts the 1980 team just ahead of the 95 Braves. Although you could probably argue that with me, and you wouldn't get too much back from me. But the best of the best when it comes to the NL East, we're talking the 1986 Mets. And man, does it pain me to put them at the top. They won the World Series over the Red Sox. Everybody remembers Buckner at first base, but 108 wins isn't too shabby at all. Gary Carter behind the dish. Keith Hernandez at first base hitting 310. Let's see. Wally Backman hit 320 that year. Rafael Santana, they had Ray Knight leading the way out in third base, hit 298. George Foster, Lenny Dykstra, Darryl Strawberry, Mookie Wilson, Kevin Mitchell. Just a great group of names there offensively. Nothing too outstanding. No Mike Schmidt's on the squad. But the pitching staff, Dwight Gooden, 17-6, an ERA under 3, 250 innings. Ron Darling, 15-6, ERA under 3, 237 innings. Bob Ojeda, 18-5, ERA under 3, 217 innings. Sid Fernandez, 16-6, finally an ERA over 3. And Rick Aguilera in 141 innings. And then Roger McDowell with 128 innings. It looks like in the bullpen, even though he was 14-9. No games started. Wow, that's a lot of decisions for a guy coming out of the bullpen, but he did throw 128. So really the rotation is what led the Mets to the top of this division for me. But I always have a lot of fun ranking those. If you guys disagree, let me know. Hit me up on social media, DM me on Twitter. Tell me why the 95 Braves should be at the top of the division and not the 86 Mets. I'd be happy to hear you out and share your thoughts on the podcast. But that wraps up the fourth segment for now of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. When we come back, we're going to talk about the MLB Players League, wrapping up the video game, The Show, as we're coming down the home stretch. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. I appreciate everybody tuning in today to episode number 184 of the Baseball Podcast. If this is your first time joining us, that means there's 183 backlogged episodes for you guys to listen to and check out. I've been the host of about 15 to 20 of them now. I can't even remember with this quarantine and everything going on how long exactly I've been doing it. But if you enjoy what you hear today, head back, listen to the previous episodes. We just went through the best of the best for the NL East. Well, we did the entire American League over the past couple of weeks as we're rounding out all of baseball. So if you're in your feelings because I upset you that the 95 Braves weren't at the top of the bunch, I probably did it in the American League as well. So head back, listen to those episodes, get up to date with ultimately where we're going to end up, and then in a couple of weeks, I'll let you guys know who the best of the best is. Earlier in this show, we also discussed the latest reports in regards to Major League Baseball returning to the field. There are sources who are cautiously optimistic that we could be back by the end of June, early July playing games, and that means 2 to 3 weeks before that, we would have our second spring training. So hopefully in about a month here, we're going to have actual games to discuss, actual baseball to talk about potential injuries, whether the divisions line up. I gave you guys my rundown of where I think the East, Central, and West would end up if, that is ultimately what happens. But because we don't have actual baseball to talk about, in this segment, we're going to talk about the Players League, the MLB The Show video game Players League that is wrapping up this weekend as the regular season has come to a close here tonight at time of recording on the 29th. It is the last games that are being played, and the top 8 out of 30 are making the playoffs, and 1 through 6 have clinched their playoff spots. There's a few games yet to be played tonight. They are currently in progress. But I'm going to assume what's going to happen for the 7 and 8 seed based on the past and where ultimately everybody's going to finish. And then I'll give you my predictions on the playoffs. But because by the time Monday runs, the championship and the semifinals will have been played. So for those of you who aren't aware, the top 8 guys are going to make the playoffs. It's going to be a best of 3, a best of 5, and then a best of 7 quarterfinals, semis, and finals, I think, if not 3-3-5. But those are happening Friday, the quarterfinals at 10 p.m. Then they'll wrap up the quarterfinals on Saturday in the afternoon, head right into the semifinals Saturday evening, and then wrap up the Ultimate Challenge Sunday on ESPN. You can see the quarters on FS1, ESPN2, the semis back on FS1, and then the championship on ESPN. So on Sunday's episode, time of recording for Monday, we're going to be talking about the championship and breaking down what's going on here in the Players League. But right off the bat, again, number 8 possibly up for grabs, but the top seed is Blake Snell from Tampa Bay. And is not only Blake one of the top performers in the Players League, but he's also one of the top entertainers. If you guys don't know, Blake's in his early 30s. He's clearly grown up on video games like I myself has. And these big leaguers and, being friends with a couple of them, you really just learn that they're kids who never have to grow up. They never have to. And when I say grow up, it basically means get a job, get a professional job, because then you have to kind of put on your suit and tie, look all pretty, act all quote unquote professional. Well, these are kids just playing video games, having fun. You know, I know everybody out there listening, or the majority of you guys listening, played video games, whether it was Halo, Call of Duty, or if you're just into NHL or FIFA or Fight Night, whatever it is. I know you've talked trash to somebody playing video games. I know we all had roommates in college you went against, even if it was Guitar Hero or Rock Band. You know, you talk some smack based on your score or based on the career mode. You know, if we're really getting into the nitty gritty, going back to N64, Mario Kart, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 for PlayStation, one of the all-time greats. Video games are a lot of fun. And watching these guys play is still very much entertaining because, one, they're good at it, and two, they're talking trash to each other. So you see kind of the personality behind the guys as to where if, Blake Snell at number 1 and Joey Gallo at number 2, if they're facing each other in real life, they can't talk to each other. They got to be in the moment, very, very focused. And now they can have a conversation, talk smack, and have a little bit of fun and make us laugh. So Blake Snell, number 1 at 24-5. His potential first-round opponent to be determined out of the following 4 could be Lux from L.A., Giolito from the White Sox, Cannell from the Yankees, or Trevor May from the Twins. It looks like it's going to be Giolito for the White Sox, but that could change here in the next couple of hours. But either way, I think Blake Snell moves on from any of these individuals into the semifinals. Number 2, then we have Joey Gallo and Gavin Lux. And this is an interesting quarterfinal because Gallo was killing people. And then I don't know if he got lazy or got disinterested, but he was, I think 15-1 at one point, finishing 23-6. And then Gavin Lux, he was at the top of the power rankings, if you guys listened to the podcast a few weeks ago. And then he finished 19-10. So either people figured him out, and the scouting report got sent around the league on how to get Gavin Lux out. But I think he'd have a chance to upset Joey Gallo. I'm going to pick Gallo to advance, but I don't rule out Gavin Lux. He would be one where I would put my money if this was March Madness on the first round going, I think that's the upset, the 12-5 game, the 13-4 upset that you see every year in March Madness. Lux could make a run and do the upset. So, number 3 is Bo Bichette at 21-8. He'll go against Happ for the Cubs. He finished 19-10. I think Bichette moves on. Bichette being a young kid, very much involved with the video games. He's been impressive offensively. He's had a little trouble pitching, but I think he would move on to the next round. And then the 4-5 game, really a toss-up. And this is my only upset that I'm picking. I'm taking Smith Jr. of the Baltimore Orioles over McNeil of the New York Mets, just because I don't like the Mets. There's really no reason. I mean, it's video games. Anything can happen. But I like Smith's energy. He's also more entertaining to myself. I've had more fun watching him, so I want to see him advance for as long as possible with Baltimore. That would set up a semifinal of Blake Snell versus Smith Jr. Once again, Blake, he's just good. He's above and beyond. And then Joey Gallo and Bo Bichette in the 2-3. Bichette could give him a run. Gallo coming off a tough first round against Lux. But Gallo, I'm going back to the well, back to, where he was really focused in and fired up, being almost 15-16-1. And I think we're going to stare at a final of Blake Snell and Joey Gallo, who have kind of established themselves as the best of the bunch here when it comes to these video games. And once again, those quarterfinal matchups, they'll be on Friday and Saturday afternoon. Then we're going to get the semis Saturday afternoon and then Saturday night. And then the championship series Sunday on ESPN. There's no time stamp for the championship series yet. It may be an all-day affair. Like I said, I believe it's a best of 5 at minimum. There it is. Okay, best of 5 for the championship series. They're playing 3 innings. Each game's taking about a half hour or so. Half hour times 5. What's that math? 150. That's 2.5, 3 hours. So I bet you it'll be Sunday afternoon. Also because the Jordan documentaries have been airing Sunday night now that I'm thinking about it on ESPN. So we're looking at probably a 5, 6 o'clock Sunday night style of recording. So when I record Sunday, I'm going to try to hold off until we get a winner there, potentially based on the schedule. Maybe I'll come on at the very end and give an update. But that's where I see the playoffs coming down the stretch. Joey Gallo, Blake Snell, they're really headed, towards the finals, and they've been the best team all along. But shout out to Rodriguez from Boston giving this a shot, finishing 2-27. So that's tough, man. 0-69. Shout out to you for sticking with it. But again, there's no real baseball to talk about, so we're talking about video games. The MLB trying to put something out there, give you a behind-the-scenes look at some of these players. I've had fun following Rhys Hoskins locally, Phillips in Kansas City and his laugh. If you haven't heard him laugh yet, oh boy, Google that one. You're going to laugh yourself for the next 5 minutes. And, the personalities of these players continue to shine, and it continues to be a positive experience for baseball. But that wraps up the fifth segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast here within the GSMC Podcast Network. Do me a favor, head to social media, follow us, like, subscribe, rate, review, all of that you do in 2020 to help small businesses and podcasts continue to grow, continue to spread the word. We really appreciate it here. This is Kevin Mahalik, your host as always. We're going to pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows here within the network. And when we come back, we're going to wrap up today's episode talking about the computers. We're going to talk about the simulations, see if there's any big updates. So hang around. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Hello and welcome back to the sixth and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. It's been a heck of a show that we've run for you here today. We've covered it all. We talked about the coronavirus and the latest update from Major League Baseball, how there is continued optimism that we're headed towards a baseball season here in 2020. There was a time there where it looked like there may be zero sports at all for the entire calendar year. But you guys at home, the listeners, you've stayed home, you've stayed safe, and we're continuing to flatten the curve. And that's why it's becoming more and more optimistic that we're getting baseball in 2020. It's going to look nothing like it did in 2019 or the rest of the history of baseball, to be completely honest. But any baseball beats zero baseball, so I'm not complaining. I'm just going to enjoy the ride, and I think you should as well. We then talked about the best of the best, continued that segment, discussing the National League East, and it was an interesting conversation. I think looking back at it, maybe there were some changes that could have been made to the standings, but I stand by where I had people. So if you disagree, let me know on social media. And now's a good point, too. If you haven't done so, I know I asked you a couple different times, but I will give you a shout out on the show. We read the reviews. If you want to give a 1-star review and tell me how poor of a job I'm doing, do that too. I'll read that here on the show. I don't discriminate when it comes to the reviews. You guys leave a review. I'll have it read here on the show. If you have a question, put it in the review. We'll answer it for you here on the show as well. But head to Twitter, head to Facebook, all of the social media. Follow not only the GSMC Baseball Podcast, but the podcast network as well. The network has podcasts on news, movies, pets, music, anything you can think of, politics, money, financials. They have a show for you guys. So if you enjoyed listening to this one, Google the podcast network or search it within the podcast platform, and you're going to get some quality content that you're going to enjoy listening to. So let's wrap up today's show here, doing an update on the baseball simulations that are currently taking place. Let's see if things are stabilizing themselves across Baseball Reference as well as Strat-O-Matic. If there's any big differences, we'll call them out. But started in the AL East, Strat-O-Matic, once again, Tampa and New York are the top two squads. And in Baseball Reference, New York is very much out in front with Tampa struggling just a little bit. I think Tampa will be better than the 15-17 mark that Baseball Reference has them currently placed in there in the AL East. Going to the AL Central, the Minnesota Twins have gotten hot for Strat-O-Matic. They're up there with the Kansas City Royals, and the Indians are in third place at 18-15. Detroit has made their way to the basement. Going over now to Baseball Reference, they got the Indians at the top. So very high on the Indians for Baseball Reference. I don't think they're going to be that high. The White Sox, I think they're a surprise team. They have them, but they still have the Twins under 500. I don't think that's the case. I think Strat-O-Matic's more along the lines of what we're going to see from the Twins after adding Josh Donaldson and a few other individuals this past offseason, coming off, I believe, a 100-win campaign for the Twins. In the AL West, Strat-O-Matic has Houston, Oakland 1-2, starting to separate themselves from Texas, LA, and Seattle. They have LA, the Angels, at 11-19. I don't think they're going to be that bad. Baseball Reference, they have Houston and Oakland at the top of the division. They're a little bit higher on the Mariners. Again, I don't know. The Mariners are going to be down at the bottom. I don't know what their schedule's lined up as. But so essentially in the American League, you're looking at the Yankees and Rays, the Athletics and Astros, and then the Central. It can go either way, paired to the smart computers here. But those are your squads. Again, I think it's just the division winner, Minnesota, and then Oakland and Tampa going to be your wild card. Strat-O-Matic going over to the National League. They got Washington at the top with Atlanta behind them. They have the Phillies right around 500. That sounds about right. The Mets and the Marlins were bringing up the rear. The Braves at the top in Baseball Reference. They're not high on the Nationals. They think there's going to be a World Series hangover in Washington, and I tend to agree. You know, teams that win the World Series go deep pitching. It's a struggle to get right back to where they were. NL Central, Strat-O-Matic, man, still got the Cubbies kicking it. 20-11 at this point, 4 games up. I don't see that, and neither does Baseball Reference, which has them at 12-19 and in the basement. So one of them has them at the top, one in the basement. I think we're going to see them more in the basement as they look to, rebuild out in Chicago. Wrapping it up here, the NL West, the Dodgers, and then the Padres for Strat-O-Matic. The Padres up there. I had the Padres lower in my picks here, and then Baseball Reference has them in the basement at 9-21. Wow. Big discrepancy there. 9-21 to 18-12. Just amazing how computers can disagree that much. But both have the Dodgers at the top. So Braves, Dodgers, clearly your top 2 in the National League. Then you go Washington, and then Colorado, Arizona, and then the NL Central. Really bunched up there. So, there really is a bit of a separation happening here. And I think that's, going to carry over to real baseball when they actually get back on the field. But looking at some individual performances, starting out offensively, Strat-O-Matic, Brett Gardner leading the league in hitting at 370. Elvis Andrus, 366. Charlie Blackmon, 362. Jimenez for Chicago at 356, starting to come back to the earth here. 370 for Brett Gardner. Man, if he does that, getting up there in age, it'd be very impressive. Trevor Story leading the league in homers at 13. Nelson Cruz leading the league in RBIs at 31. But Bryce Harper right behind him at 30. That's the first time we've seen a Philly on here. Look at that. He's up to 11 home runs. Second in the league with 30 RBIs. So Bryce is getting hot for Strat-O-Matic with Jorge Soler as well for Kansas City Royals with 11 and 30. So those two near the top of the list offensively when it comes to Strat-O-Matic. Let's see how we're doing over here to Baseball Reference. if they're having a similar situation. We got a new hits leader, batting average leader, Jose Peraza for Boston, up to 382. It's been David Dahl for as long as I've been doing this on the podcast. He's dropped all the way down to 371. So, he's had a little bit of a slump here with Peraza taking advantage to get to the top of the league. Let's look at home runs and RBIs, see if we see Harper. Not on this list, so not doing as well. Reyes for Cleveland at the top with 13. Arenado, Simeon, Lindor, Torres all with 11. RBIs, Alvarez still leads the way with 39, followed by Torres, Lindor. Chris Bryant at 28, having himself a good offensive summer for Baseball Reference. First time we've heard a Cubs name there as well when it comes to offensive statistics. And then let's see, the pitching stats. Strat-O-Matic, Blake Snell. Not only is he going to win the Players League title, but he's also going to lead the league in ERA. They got him at .59. Steven Strasburg at .86. Right behind him, Garrett Cole, 1.36. Clayton Kershaw, 1.60. Then you get to the surprises of Gausman for San Francisco, Porcello for the Mets, Means for Baltimore, all under 2. That leaves 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys. ERA still under 2. A heck of a start for them. Ian Kennedy with 12 saves. He's leading the bullpen out for Strat-O-Matic. And then Baseball Reference, let's see, at the top of the list here for pitching stats. Madison Bumgarner, the only guy with an ERA under 1. Again, I keep telling you guys, I don't think Madison is going to be pitching that well. Hey, he's an old 27 or 28, however old he is. You would think he's in his prime, but he's used a lot of bullets. So I would be very impressed if he goes to Arizona and has this type of success. I would eat crow if that happens, and I would be very impressed. I really would. Rick Porcello, he's been on both of these lists. I don't think he's going to have that strong of a year. 1.37. Steven Matz at 1.41. Man, they got 2 guys under 2 for the Mets, and they're not at the top of the division. That's tough. Freddie Peralta, Walker Buehler, they got a bunch of guys under 2 when it comes to Baseball Reference still. Strikeouts, Garrett Cole, Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander at the top. You could pretty much write that in on any ballot, and you'd be just about right. But let's say with saves here, who do we got? We got Will Smith in Atlanta with 10, and then Jairo Diaz out in Colorado with 10 as well, leading the league here in the bullpen. But again, when it comes to teams, it seems to be the standard cast of characters for 2020, the people we've been discussing in regards to the predictions and where ultimately they're going to finish, but some surprises when it comes to the individual performances. And I would love to talk about actual individual performances, but this is 2020. This is where we're at. We're talking video games and simulations. But hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. I had a lot of fun recording it. I think we had a great episode for you guys as well. The best of the best, National League East, the update on the coronavirus plan, the video games, the show coming to an end, and then keeping all you guys updated on the simulation so we can talk statistics, even if they're not real. Still fun to discuss. But one last time, head to social media, follow us, like, subscribe, rate, review, all of that. We appreciate it. It goes a long way. But that wraps it up for this episode here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. As always, I appreciate you guys listening, and we'll talk to you next Monday. Enjoy your weekend, everybody.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.